Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. Maduro denied of Venezuela's gold. Let's explore. That's right, a British judge has rejected Venezuela's Maduro's bid for gold in London Bank. I think that's an important headline here. Maduro had demanded the gold under the auspices of fighting coronavirus. Yeah, right. This comes to us from Fox Business by way of the Associated Press. Very interesting indeed. This British judge on Thursday refused to give Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro control of nearly $2 billion in gold sitting in a Bank of England vault because Britain does not recognize the socialist leader as president of the Latin American nation. In fact, most nations around the world do not recognize him as the legitimate leader. And this story that has been shared with me by several members of the community, from which I greatly appreciate, Maduro has demanded the gold to help his cash-starved nation fight the coronavirus pandemic. But the central bank for the United Kingdom, whose government recognizes Venezuelan opposition politician Juan Guaido as the country's legitimate leader, had refused to hand it over to Maduro's administration. The ruling clarifies the question of who is Venezuela's legitimate leader, or at least in the eyes of one world power. This is very much showing the isolation of the Maduro government, said Christopher Sabatini, a senior research fellow for Latin America at the Chatham House think tank in London. Guaido has sought to preserve the gold stash at the Bank of England to keep it out of the hands of the Maduro government, which it contends is illegitimate and corrupt. His lawyers reiterated during a recent 4-day hearing their stance that the National Assembly leader became Venezuela's rightful president under provisions of the country's constitution. Guaido, who holds no political power within Venezuela, called the ruling a great victory for his interim government's international recognition and the anti-Maduro coalition fight to protect the country's wealth and assets held abroad, which includes an ongoing battle over its Citgo refineries in the United States. The first thing is that it's protected from the clutches of the dictatorship, Guaido said of the gold, adding that for now it will remain in the bank's vaults. Also Thursday, Maduro's foreign minister, Jorge Arrezia, announced that Venezuela had withdrawn an expulsion order against European Union Ambassador Brillante Pedrosa. Maduro, on Monday, had ordered her delegation out hours after the EU sanctioned several Maduro officials. However, Arreza and EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell released a joint statement saying they had repaired relations in a phone call. Venezuela, a nation in economic and political crisis, sits atop the world's largest crude reserves, but that source of cash has dried up under years of mismanagement and more recently stiff U.S. sanctions aimed at forcing Maduro out. Venezuela holds a total of $1.8 billion worth of gold in the Bank of England, and Maduro was asking for $1 billion worth of it. The Bank of England holds the world's second largest sum of gold bars in the world after the New York Federal Reserve, and a boast of never losing any to thieves in 320 years. So it doesn't look like the Maduro regime is going to be able to steal it. The dispute hinged on the British stance towards Venezuela, a country in economic and political crisis where both Maduro and Guaido have been claiming presidential powers for more than a year. And under the Constitution, the appointment of Guaido is only a temporary measure. He will serve as a temporary president until they can have legitimate elections again. Venezuela's central bank, controlled by Maduro, sought to release the gold, which it says now that it wants to sell for food and medical equipment that is desperately needed to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. but had also sought the gold before the pandemic began. And that just goes to show you, that alone should tell you that, especially how Maduro has been behaving, we cannot trust him with the gold. That's for sure. A dictator or has the gold stored there. The British government has unequivocally recognized Mr. Guaido as president of Venezuela, the court ruling said. It necessarily follows that it no longer recognizes Mr. Maduro as president of Venezuela. Sarosh Zuwaila said in a statement that the judgment entirely ignores the reality of the situation on the ground in Venezuela. Here we can see a sign that says "No Dictadura." Good play on words in Spanish there. Mr. Maduro's government is in complete control of Venezuela and its administrative institutions, and only it can ensure the distribution of the humanitarian relief and medical supplies needed to combat the coronavirus pandemic, he said. This outcome will now delay matters further to the detriment of the Venezuelan people whose lives are at risk. Well, so that's the argument for releasing the gold from this guy, from Sarosh Zuwaila. I mean, it's obvious he's in control. He's a dictator. But that does not mean that he's going to distribute the money from the sale of the gold to the people. He may do some of it or whatever as a measure of force, but look at how he's treated his people ever since he became president anyway. It's been horrible how he's been living compared to the people. The UK recognizes the claim of Guaido, who heads the Venezuela's Congress, as do the United States and about 6 other governments. Guaido proclaimed himself the interim president in early 2019, months after Maduro declared victory in an election that his critics say was rigged in his favor. In fact, most governments recognize that it was rigged. Maduro maintains the support of key allies, including Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, and Cuba. Despite its support for Guaido, the UK continues to have diplomatic ties to Maduro's government. The British have not granted diplomatic credentials to the envoy that Guaido has named ambassador to the UK. And I believe they ought to soon sever those ties, in my opinion. But nonetheless, that's where it stands. So no gold for Maduro. Interesting news. Thanks again for several of the members of the community that made me aware of this story. Of course, a lot of this here breaking here. We'll see what happens. Multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch. Gently caressed, very gently, that like button. And I want to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.